Welcome to Out of My Mouth, the program where raw thoughts meet unfiltered conversations.
Join us as we dive into the depths of human experience, where we share stories, perspectives, and insights that just might challenge the status quo.
Get ready to laugh, cry, and ponder the world around you like never before. This is Out of My Mouth.
The views and opinions of our guest and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of New Thought Media Network, or any organization we may be affiliated with. Here at New Thought Media Network, we welcome freedom of speech and courageous conversations. There are many topics that can be difficult to navigate. Challenging the status quo and engaging in lively debate is important to expanding our understanding of one another, and life in general. Creating a peaceful world doesn't happen because no one disagrees, it happens from a willingness to understanding one another. In our programming, we strive to expand consciousness and assist people in creating remarkable lives. Your comments are welcome at info@ntmedia.org.
Good afternoon and welcome to show number 1, Out of My Mouth. I'm Barbara Jean.
And I'm Marg, and let's see what comes out of our mouths.
And Cheryl is away today, but she will be back with us next week. Well, let us begin with the land acknowledgement. Okay, so as we gather today, we acknowledge that we're standing on the historical land of the Wendat peoples, and more recently that of the Mississaugas and the Haudenosaunee nations. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island. May we walk alongside our Indigenous family, recognizing our shared stewardship of this earth. Let us carry forward the spirit of unity, understanding, and resilience that we've been reminded of through our reflections. Let us hold in our hearts the intention to learn, to support, and to advocate for justice and sovereignty for us all. In doing so, we acknowledge our interconnectedness and the strength that comes from standing together in truth, respect, and love. May this intention guide us in our actions and thoughts, inspiring us to contribute to a world where the dignity and rights of all are honored. Let us be mindful of the role we play in this ongoing journey towards healing and unity. And by making this acknowledgement, we strive to be allies and take an active part in reconciliation by honoring the land, the history, as well as the unique heritage and culture of the Indigenous peoples. This fosters our commitment to create a world that works for the highest and best good of all life. Please take a moment to acknowledge your personal commitment to the land you are on and the path you choose to walk going forward. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you, Barbara. And it is my pleasure to introduce Reverend David Old. David has been involved in ministry, Unity ministry, for over 30 years, and he has been serving at Unity Windsor since 2017 to a loving, joyous, active, online and in-person spiritual community. He is blessed by a strong core of devoted volunteers eager to spread the unity message. David loves to cook, and prior to entering ministry, he spent over 19 years cooking and managing restaurants and country club kitchens. For 6 years, my goodness, he owned and operated and served as a chef at a very successful restaurant of his own. Don't you just want to sit down at David's table? For 12 years, he worked in real estate and development. David resides in St. Clair, Michigan, just 25 minutes from Windsor, with his partner Dave Height and their two dogs, Jojo and Inga. And today, David also serves on the Unity Canada board. Let's join David when he will talk to us today about the joy of losing my mind, his journey shedding the cacophony of internal dialogue and finding solace in the stillness that lies beyond the thoughts. It is in the serene expanse of silence that he discovered the paradoxical truth. When the mind is lost, serenity is found, and problems dissipate in the quietude of no mind. Welcome, David.
David, hello.
Hello, hello. Well, thank you for having me here.
Oh, we're grateful to have you. So what's this about quieting that cacophony? I need to know how to do that. Do share.
Wouldn't everyone be, much happier and much more at peace if they didn't have all of those thoughts running around in their head and are, the monkey mind that they say, one thing and the judgment and just looking at things and finding things wrong with them all the time, and looking at yourself and finding things wrong with you all the time. And it could just be sort of a real downer. Just all of this monkey mind stuff. And anyway, so yeah, so I'm just, what I'm saying is that there is a way to quiet the mind and to rise above all of those thoughts. And so that's, here to discuss with you. So
if I might ask, can you take us to a personal experience where you came to this knowledge? Is there something that resonates for you that, yeah, I know I want to quiet my mind? And
well, it's the experiences of life. This is something I've worked on for a very long time, but I think where I really realized that it's possible was when I was working as a hospital chaplain, and I was working in. I volunteered for working in the emergency room, so this was my first experience with being in some truly horrific situations. Where people were dying and were maimed, and that was my first experience with being with people when they died, and so that whole experience working in the emergency room, I realized that there was I could tap into that my inner core. That there was within me a place of just pure peace, and no matter what was going on, I could stay there, and I could help whoever I was with, and so it was. But there's been other experiences, but I would say those experiences just made me realize that there was something within me that was like perfectly calm, and no matter what was going on. And so that's one experience in particular was a young father that had two children, and he just had got up in the morning and wanted to go out for a motorcycle ride, and he went out to a motorcycle ride and got hit by a truck, and he was essentially brain dead. And so it was, that experience of working with his family and keeping, and he was a very religious person, and he had a church that came out, just in groves, and we were managing all the people who were there to support the family and everything. And I just remembered that experience, and with so much going on, and being able to be there, be a presence of calm for everyone there. It was, that's, you know.
That's an important
Mm.
role in moments like that. When there's a tragedy like that, it's so difficult for everyone involved to try and deal with the suddenness.
Right.
And so being able to help them to calm their mind a little bit, to uh, quiet that chatter that's obviously going to be running. Is there something in particular you would do to help with that, or?
I think the most you can do is to be fully present to people, and
Mhm.
and not have your mind, you know, worrying and running off into what you're going to do. And if you, what I found out in the emergency room, the most important thing was to be fully present to whatever situation that you find yourself in. And when you're fully present, then you are. You're focused. You're focused on what needs to be done, and you're not worried about what happened or what's going to happen later. It's being fully present to people, and that's, you know, that's the importance of, to me as a minister, if I'm with someone, to be fully present with them. If I'm up there on the stage and I'm speaking to you know, to the congregation out there, it's being, you know, feeling the connection with, and being fully present with them in that present moment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, is there a particular practice that can help people in the day to day to begin to quiet that chatter, all of the judgment and criticism, and all of the stuff that's running through our mind that, you know, we go, oh, I'm thinking this or that, but are we thinking it, or are we pulling in a memory of something somebody else told us and we're now accepting it as our thought, but in fact it may have come from someone else?
Oh, of course, our thoughts constantly come from somewhere else. Our thoughts constantly, you know, I'm really, I believe that, you know, it's the thoughts just show up. Okay, they really do. I mean, they're out there in the ethers. I mean, they really are. Anytime you sit down especially if you watch news, you know, I mean, it's like we're being bombarded. Every time we turn on the television or listen to a news, we're being bombarded by somebody else's thoughts. And the truth of the matter is we are not our thoughts. And we're not their thoughts either, but we take them in, we make their thoughts our thoughts. And but they're not, they're just thoughts until we grab hold of them. And then we make them our thoughts. And those thoughts, and the fact that we frequently don't even realize that we're doing this, but those thoughts are the ones that causes all of the suffering. You know, all of these thoughts, all of these judgments, all of these opinions, you know, our opinions about this political party or that political party. And, you know.
Well, right, you're American.
Yeah, we are.
We're not
So
really
we have a lot of that going on.
up here. We're Canadian. We don't think about those things.
No, not at all. No.
Till election comes up, and then we.
Yeah,
we
right, right. But the thing is, we are not our thoughts. Okay, we're not our thoughts, and it's realizing that, and being mindful of the thoughts that we're holding in our minds. And the thing is, people are so used to it that they don't even realize, you know, that they're having all of these conversations in their heads.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just thinking thoughts here about thoughts are not real, but they can be our reality.
We make them our reality. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you have the
Exactly.
power not to make those your reality. You have that power. You know? And so you asked me, I mean, I've been meditating for, you know, over probably 40 years. I mean, meditation has been my spiritual practice, but it's not something that I do intentionally that much anymore. But the meditation that when I started to meditate and just, sitting in the silence, and after all, that was Charles Fillmore's way. That was their spiritual practice. The Fillmores were the founders of Unity movement, and so they would spend time every evening just in the silence, and being aware of the thoughts, but not taking hold of them, and just sitting there in the silence. And you, by sitting in the silence, I mean, you start realizing how many thoughts are constantly coming into your mind. If you're making yourself aware of all of that inner thinking, and all of those inner thoughts, and all of those judgments, and the other things, and all the worries, the worries about what's happening in the future, and the annoyance of what happened earlier in the day. And you become, in the silence, you become very aware of all of these. And the thing is, you do not have to, you just acknowledge the thought, but let it go. You do not need to grab hold of a thought and let it drag you into a story. And it will. A thought, if you can grab a hold of it, and it'll drag you into something that happened in the past, or it'll drag you into the fear of what possibly could go on in the future. So you have that power, and people just don't realize it. And so the use of meditation is one way of developing and understanding the power that you have over thought. You don't have the power to keep those thoughts from coming in many ways. And like I said, you're constantly being bombarded by thoughts of other people. I mean, you can't get in a conversation and not be bombarded by other people's thoughts, and other people's opinions, and other people's judgments. And it's even worse when you get into a talk show or something like that on television, or the news. Anyway, you learn through meditation. You learn what's going on in your mind, and you also learn that you do not have to encourage those thoughts. You don't have to grab hold of those thoughts, and that there is actually with a very quiet, still center, and that quiet, still center is what I call spirit. It's what I call pure awareness. It's awareness without thought. It's awareness that is and consciousness. But awareness is without thought. That's the way I look at the difference between awareness and consciousness. Consciousness has the thoughts, but consciousness is not the thoughts. And awareness is without thought. And so there's that center within us that you can learn to tap into, that awareness, that pure awareness, or the gap between thoughts. There's a gap. There's a thought, and then there's another thought. They don't overlap. They may appear connected, but there's a gap between those thoughts. And so that gap is where the practice is practice being in that gap. And that gap, the more you practice it, the wider that gap gets. And the wider that gap gets, the calmer and more centered you are. The calmer your life is, the more centered you are. And the more present you are. And which to me is, if we're fully present, fully present, and that in itself is a practice, okay? Being mindful, by being fully present and mindful of whatever it is that you're doing, and fully focused on that. That's training your mind as well. So our mind are a tool that have sort of run amok because we've let them run amok. And the thing is, our mind is a tool, and through the proper training, you can train it to be really pretty still. Yeah. And it's a wonderful place to be.
Let me ask you about your journey. I think through your spiritual journey, I think you can have a spiritual journey without being involved with a spiritual center and whatever. But if we go back to, I was reading about you being a chef and in real estate, and I think there was something else. How did you come into ministry, and can you connect it to what you're talking about, what you've learned, and
Well,
how you to become still?
uh, so I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and my mother took me to church, and my two brothers took us to church every Sunday. My grandmother, my father's mother, was very religious, and so she came with us. So I grew up in a church. And so I loved Sunday school when I was a little kid. I enjoyed my church, and I was a youth leader. So I had a very much a spiritual background, religious background. Learned to pray and all of that. But I did eventually come to a point by the time I was in high school that what I was being taught, essentially the dogma of like our way is the only way. I reached a point where it just didn't make sense to me anymore by the time I was a senior in high school. And I mean, I was taught that, this is the way. And if you don't believe this, then you're going to hell. So if you're a Buddhist, you're going to hell. If you're Hindu, you're going to hell. If you're Muslim, you're going to hell because you don't believe, the way you're supposed to believe. And I, eventually reached a point where that just did not make sense. And one of the biggest things that caused me to change my mind was moving to Hawaii. Where I grew up in a segregated town. And so it was, I went to an all white school, blacks went to their schools. They even had their own, in my time, it was before, segregation. And we had downtown, you had black water fountains and you had black, or restrooms for colors. And so that's the town that I grew up in as a little boy. When I went to Hawaii, I was the minority. And so that was a real head turner there. And so I went to high school in Hawaii, and with a whole lot of Buddhists and and Japanese and Chinese and Hawaiians, and I was the minority. And it really just put a whole different spin on the way I looked at things. That's really where I started. I was really enjoying my Buddhist friends, and it just wasn't gelling with me that they were going to go to hell just because they were Buddhist.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I had a spiritual epiphany at 27 in a Nazarene church, and it was the same story. I was there for about a year and a half because I'd had this beautiful awakening, this experience of God as love. And then the pastor's telling us, rabbi's going to hell, and the people who've never heard of Jesus Christ, they're going to hell. And if you wouldn't accept Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord, you're going to hell. And I'm sitting there going, it just doesn't feel like the experience I had, because my experience of God was such a loving, all-encompassing thing. And it was light. It was beautiful. So that didn't make sense. So I only stayed there about a year and a half before I left, because I needed to find a place that actually was accepting of all people.
So the thing is that, you weren't letting other people's thoughts, stay in your mind. Other people's thoughts were coming in there. They were really, you were being, let's face it, we're programmed from the moment we're born by our, by our upbringing, by our how our parents teach us, how our siblings interact with us, how our schools teach us, what our church background is, whatever, our churches are programming us, our culture is programming us, our government is programming us. We're taking in all of these thoughts that are not ours. And we're actually just programming our mind to adjust to how those thoughts are being put together and everything. And at a point, like you said, you wake up, you wake up and realize that these thoughts are just thoughts. And what you eventually learn is thoughts have as much truth in them as you wish to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the key, right? If I believe in them, they get to be mine.
That's
If
right.
I go, whatever, then they can belong to somebody else. But
Right.
yeah, I was raised in a home without religion. And so I feel kind of blessed by that, actually. I didn't have as much to forget. But being raised in a Canadian home, I mean, Canadians, there is that, religious thing that we all come to know, whether we're in church or not. You're still hearing it. You're still part of the consciousness of the country, which a lot of people were going to church. Families would go to church. And yeah, it was like, that was what happened Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Got get a blessing.
Well, another key part for me also was, your society, it has its thoughts about how you should be. And so I grew up at a very early age feeling that I didn't know exactly what to call it at the time, but I felt like I was gay. And it was something that, was totally unacceptable. I mean, at that time, it was unacceptable for society in general, for most people. And especially in a Pentecostal church, it was just, you're dealing with the devil here. And so I came out after I graduated from high school. I mean, by the time I graduated from high school, I knew I was a gay person. And
right. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's one of the challenges I had with religion, traditional religion, was deciding who was good and who was bad.
Right.
I don't think God does that. I'm pretty sure.
I don't either. No, I don't either.
Because God is energy. It's intelligence. It's energy. It doesn't judge or decide, it simply is and operates through each and every one of us, which is got to be careful what you're thinking about, because what you think about, you bring about. Yeah. Well, we're going to go to a quick little commercial break. You're watching Out of My Mouth, our first new show here with this new branding. And we're so delighted for anybody who's watching today. Grateful that you're here. And we'll be back in just a minute with just a little bit more about losing my mind. You're watching the New Thought Media Network. Be right back.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please come be you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
And we're back. So I have a
We're
question.
back.
So, David, what
Yeah.
about people who go, I can't meditate? I can't quiet my mind.
Well, they're going to have to try harder, because I say that you can. And there's maybe one type of meditation is not something that you work well with. There's all different kinds of meditation. And, just going out and walking in the forest, or, walking out in nature, to me is one of my favorite ways of just relaxing and stilling your mind and being fully present to nature. And see, you've got to train your mind, because so many people's minds are not in the present moment. They are worrying about something that might happen, or they're worrying about what they said or somebody else said. I mean, their minds are either in the past or in the future, and the practice is to be fully present in this now moment. And you can go out and walk in nature, and that is a wonderful way of being fully present. And but be mindful of where your mind is. Be mindful. Are you fully present? Are you listening to that bird up there singing his little heart out? I woke up this morning to one of the most beautiful sermons I've ever heard. And it was a robin who's built their nest right out here outside my office window. And I love robins. I think they have one of the most cheerful little songs. It's cheerful, and I just sit here and in my seat, and where I meditate in the morning, and just let that little bird give me the most joyful sermon I've heard.
I love that.
Awesome.
But so there's different ways, and so what we're trying to work with is our mind, and to be aware of how our thoughts are just are for many of us out of control. And there's a quote by Eckhart Tolle. He says, if you make friends with the present moment and always say yes to whatever is, life becomes friendly towards you. Life always shows you the face that you show it. It's always a mirror. And I love that quote by Tolle. If you're friendly with life, say yes. Don't argue with life. That's where the suffering comes in, when something happens and we just allow ourselves to go to pieces. I mean, what is, a problem. There's no problems. There's situations, there's experiences. If it's a problem, we make it the problem. And
Yes,
so, I mean, all of the spiritual teachers that I've read and I've listened to, they all have the same thing to say, accept what is, and don't fight it, because it's a losing battle. And so make life, be friendly with life. Yeah.
I love that.
I have to shout about it sometimes, though, first. Before I get into okay, this is what is, and what can I do moving forward. But first of all, I have to maybe shout and scream about it.
I have.
Can it?
Yes, and there are times when fuck is appropriate.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I love you, David.
We're getting real here, okay?
We are. And I still want to go back to, how did you come out of being, that you walked through being a chef and a real estate person into ministry?
Well,
how did that transition, and where did the dialogue come to you?
I can tell you exactly where it came from. I grew up in the Pentecostal church. I was very involved from the moment I was a little kid. I was a Sunday school teacher, a youth leader, all of that.
Yeah.
and a very religious grandmother who, when I was a little boy, she said, I talked to the Lord last night and he told me that you were going to be a minister. So that's where it came from. And I took it. At the age of, before I was 9 years old, I felt like I was being called because my grandmother told me, because she had it in with God. And so and God told her I was going to be a minister. So I planned on being a minister from the time I was a little boy until I had my crisis of faith, when it just didn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
But it never left me, because I just because my religion wasn't fitting with me, I still felt very spiritual. I felt a strong sense and connection to the divine. I did not the concept of the divine that I had been fed, but I still had a connection and felt that connection. So I brought that with me. I when I left church, I didn't set foot in a church. When I left church during my senior year, when I graduated, that was it. I didn't set foot in a church for 15 years, but I was still, except for maybe a wedding or a funeral, and that's it. But I never went church shopping or anything. But I read prolifically, and I mean, I was reading Ram Dass, I was reading Alan Watts, Evelyn Underhill, who did all of the works on the mystics and everything. Found mysticism absolutely, just fascinating. So I read all the lives of the mystics and everything. So I was really, I studied Buddhism. I studied Hinduism, Taoism, and I just soaked it up. And I saw that there was so much more to spirituality than the dogma and that I was being taught. I love Christianity. I mean, I really do. I love the teachings of Jesus. I love the teachings of Jesus more than the teachings about Jesus, and I absolutely loved unity when I discovered unity, because for unity, Jesus is not the great exception. Jesus is the great example. And that, I felt a complete calling to that. So 15 years after I left the church, I was involved with Swami Muktananda's group in Austin, Texas. And I was going to their satsangs and chanting with them and loved it. It just enjoyed it. I really learned a lot about meditation with that group. And a person was also a member of Unity and suggested that I go to Unity. So back in 1984, I ended up visiting Unity for the first time.
Wow.
And I sit on the back pew, and I tell people this story all the time. I sit on the very back row, and in that Unity church in Austin, Texas. And by the time the service is over, I was just a blubbering mess. I mean, I was just crying. I was just sobbing because I felt at home. I felt completely, totally accepted for the gay man that I was. I felt accepted. I felt loved. And so all of a sudden, this feelings of ministry came back.
You found a place where you were okay.
I found a place where I was okay. Right. So, and then, and also, I mean, so I honestly think I've had a fascinating life. I mean, and I've loved my life. I've had so many chapters of my life, and in Unity, I met a woman. Her name was Pamela. She eventually would change her name to Jennifer, but I met her, and I wanted children, and she wanted children, and we really hit it off, and we ended up getting married. And I was very completely, open with the fact that, of my past and everything. And, and that was okay with my past, but I made a commitment to Jennifer, and we were married for 29 years.
Wow.
Unfortunately, we were never able to have children, and it was just one of those things. We were not able to have it, but we were together for 29 years, and eventually, what drove us apart was when I first met her. I told her, I said, I told her I was having these feelings of going into ministry, with Unity. And she looked at me and said, just dead seriously, I have no intention whatsoever of being a minister's wife. Read. And foolish me, I thought, oh, she'll change her mind. And 29 years later, she had not changed her mind. And
She's okay to be married to a gay man, but not a minister.
And Dave, how does Dave like being a minister's wife?
Husband.
he really doesn't like it that much at all, if you want to be serious.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh, dear.
But
You're an interesting bunch, people.
Yeah.
People
So
are
anyway, eventually that is what caused us to break up, because I felt called to go into ministry. So in 2008, I got accepted into the ministerial school, and I left Jennifer. I left her the house, I said, I'm going to do this, and I would go back and visit and all that, but I did it because I felt called to do it. And that did not work well for her at all. No, it did not. So we eventually, and then what happened is, so I was in ministerial school for just 2 years, and she ended up having to have a back operation. She had one before. And she had scoliosis as a child, so she was having constant back problems. And then she was in a car accident. And by the way, my wife was the first woman cadet police officer to graduate from the police academy in Austin, Texas. The very first woman. So
Wow.
a police officer, and she had left that job when I married her, but she had been in that position. Anyway, I think I lost my train of thought.
That's okay, David. I'm a person who learns by example, and as you're talking, and you were talking about, your thoughts and where your thoughts can take you. And I also said about, thoughts can become reality or not, right?
Yeah, right.
And you did not allow your thoughts to keep you stuck. You had your thoughts expand to go into ministry, even though your wife at the time said, no, I'm not going to, that's not life for me. Yeah. Your thoughts could have said, well, no, I won't follow my dream then. Yeah. Right. So your thoughts took you into action.
My thoughts
is what I'm seeing.
Okay, so my thoughts did take me into action, and then I left ministerial school to go back to be with her when she was having that operation, and then she ended up having another operation, and I really was seriously doubting. So I decided, well, I will go through the licensed Unity teacher program instead of because I was actually going to Unity Village, and they had at that time an in-person, on campus ministerial school. So I was in school with other ministers, but that was away from home. So I began to think that I would just go in the licensed Unity teacher and not, leave her by herself. And and then once I made that decision, she made the decision that we were getting the divorce. So
Wow.
So it was, she decided that was the best thing for her. And I have to say this story because it really is. To me, we divorced very amicably. We understood that our lives had reached the point where that they were no longer necessary to go in the same track.
Mhm.
So after we divorced, she had been married before. She had a high school sweetheart, and they had dated all through school. And she and him got married as soon as she graduated, and they only stayed married, like he ended up in the army, and they ended up divorcing after 3 years. I knew that she had never quit loving that guy. And so she ended up meeting him again after we got a divorce, and they got married.
Wow.
So and when I met Michael, that was his name. When I met Michael, I mean, I heard all about Michael, but when I met Michael, it was like I'd known this guy my entire life. We hit it off, and
Wow.
so he would introduce me as his husband-in-law. He said, we have a lot in common. We obviously, we have a whole lot in common. We love the same woman.
That's hilarious. And
It is, yeah.
wow. And when did you meet Dave?
I met Dave. I actually met him online, and when I had to do 2 church internships. When I was in ministerial school. So after we got a divorce, I went back to ministerial school in 2013 and ended up graduating in 2016. And so before I got my Master of Divinity, I had to do 2 church internships. So I did one in San Francisco, which was a wonderful place to do it as a gay man. And then I did my second one in Warren, Michigan, right outside of Detroit at Renaissance Unity. That's the Unity that Marianne Williamson used to preach at, right? And so I did my internship there. And so before I came to Detroit, I had several minister friends who asked me, said, "Are you interested in getting a relationship?" And I said, yes. I had 2 minister friends ask me the same question in 1 week. And both of them said, "Well, I would find a partner before I got a church." and I took their advice because, once you're in a church, you sign an ethics agreement that you do not date anybody in your church. And I totally understand that. And so once you get a church, you're pretty much married to that church. And so I took their advice, and I joined Our Times, which is an online dating service for seniors, and they have a gay section. And so I put my profile as being in Detroit, and Dave was the first person to contact me, and his name, it was David also, and he was also Unity, and then also the clincher was he at one time had been a member of Renaissance Unity. But he had left Renaissance Unity and joined another Unity in Farmington Hills. And so if he had been still a member of Renaissance Unity, I would have never dated him.
Exactly.
And so anyway, we met. I came to Renaissance Unity on the Saturday before Easter Sunday in 2016. And Dave met me there, and we haven't been apart since. It was a great match. It really was. It was one of those God things you talk about.
Yeah. It's funny
That's
how
awesome.
that happens. Yeah, nobody told me before getting a church that you have to find your partner first.
It makes it a lot easier.
I always did my work in a cafe, so that's where I met my husband. Was in a cafe, reading my books, preparing my lessons. There he was.
So to get back to one of Marge's questions is that, when I was in restaurant business for a long time in my past life. I was a lot of country club cooking. Also had my own restaurant. When Jennifer and I got married, we we bought a restaurant and had a restaurant for 5 years, and it was a very successful restaurant. We did a very good job. She managed the front of the house, and I managed the back. But the thing with cooking and being a chef and cooking in kitchens, it's a very it's a high impact. I mean, lots of stress, constant. You have to be focused on what you're doing. And so that was that in itself was a wonderful way to train my mind in dealing with a lot of stress, of the job, and with a lot of different things going on. And so that my whole life has been my teacher, which is the way it should be.
Yeah, I think it is the case for all of us, for sure. I love that. I love that.
Thanks for coming back to that. Like I say, I learn lessons by examples. And so I can read something in a textbook, but it's like, okay, unless I'm sitting in this chair, I can relate to being in the chair and closing my eyes and, but you're talking about real life experiences, and that's easier for me to learn by. I can see actually in cooking, it being very methodical, right? Yeah. While you're chopping and creating. I find, I'm not a chef. My son is actually, but I find a comfort in cooking. If I'm going through a difficult time, even if I don't feel like eating, I can find solace or whatever in the creation of whatever I am making.
Yeah, absolutely. I always loved cooking, and I learned. I had a great experience. I had two grandmothers. One could not boil water, and and the other was a great cook. So I learned very early on that there was good cooking and there was, not so good cooking. And I loved my grandmother. Well, I love both of my grandmothers. I mean, I had wonderful women in my life. A strong mother, and both my grandmothers were just great, strong women. But I did sort of learn from, and my mother was a good cook too. So I enjoyed cooking, and like you, Marg, I've always found cooking to be a real joyful experience. I enjoyed the creativity, and I did. I just always enjoyed, and that's why I ended up going into cooking as a career, because I did enjoy it so much. And then after I had a restaurant of my own, I was so ready to sell that restaurant.
Well, I gotta say, I've eaten both of your cooking, and you're both excellent.
But thank you.
Thank you. And you do it because you're a good cook if you love to do it. I think. I mean, if you love to do something, you're going to do well at it. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, amazing. So the ideas of meditation, you mentioned that there's a lot of different styles of meditation, because there are those people who think they cannot meditate, and I would disagree with that. So can you share a couple of the styles of meditation that people might take away from here?
Well, I mean, one of the ways is just being mindful. Okay. Just a real clear awareness of what you're doing. I have a friend that I'm thinking of that she says, I just can't meditate. But this woman is a marvelous photographer. And so, and the attention to detail, when you're a photographer, and the attention to detail, and especially when you're, framing your shot and everything, that in itself is meditation. Okay. You may, so, I mean, and so when you're doing something that you love, like cooking too, which we just talked about, that can be a mindful meditation. And I'm saying right now, if you're doing something you truly love and put your whole heart into it, you're meditating. You're being fully focused into what you're doing, and you're training your mind. Again, you're training your mind to be focused. And it's easy to focus your mind on something that you love to do.
Exactly. So what's the importance of training your mind?
the importance of training your mind is that you become more in control of your mind, or you become more aware of what you're doing with your thoughts. You're becoming more aware of what of your feelings, your moods. You're being mindful of where you are, in your mental space, where you are in the, you're being focused on life, on the present moment, your body as it is right now.
Exactly. Well, we're down to our last 4 minutes, if you can believe it. That's how fast it goes.
Well, this has gone by fast. That's been fun.
It has. So what's one final thought that you would like when it comes to the idea of, losing your mind as a positive? What is one thing you think everybody should consider taking away from this?
Okay, I'm gonna come up with one of. I read this. Anthony de Mello is a Jesuit Indian priest that I got involved. I've read several of his books a long time ago, and I just recently took them off my bookshelf and read them again. And he gave one of the best examples of enlightenment I've heard. And he says enlightenment is absolute cooperation with the inevitable. I love that.
Like
Okay.
that.
It's
Wow.
absolute, cooperation with the inevitable. That was his definition of enlightenment. So I leave that with you. I think that if you can really get into that, you've got it made.
Absolutely. Mark, what about you? What about you for a final thought on the joy of losing my mind?
Well, I'll take it to the phrase of the joy of cooking. There's the joy of cooking books and whatever.
Yes.
So I'll take that and remind myself that I can consider it meditation while I'm cooking, as long as I'm mindful when I'm doing it. Yes.
Paying attention. I love it. And for me, I think the big thing for me is to remember that, we train little children not to run in traffic because that will affect their life.
Yeah.
So we remind them and we remind them and we remind them. And so we do meditation because our thoughts create our lives. And if they're running rampant in the wrong direction, we could get hit by a truck. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention. David, thank you so much for being here. You are truly a gift and a blessing. Our beautiful Cheryl is not with us today because she had an appointment she had to be at, but she will be back next week. So be sure you're here. And Marg, you're a joy as always, my sister. And so Thank you. And Deja and Maple in the background producing all this. We are eternally grateful to you as well. So have a great week, everyone. And this is the first episode of Out of My Mouth, because you never know what's coming out of there. If you're watching New Thought Media Network, do come again. Bye for now.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
See you in the background.
Bye.
Bye.